So welcome everyone. This is the Equity in Ophthalmology segment of the Honestly Bilal podcast. I'm your host, Arhem Barkatullah. I'm a third year medical student at Dartmouth, and I'm so excited to be joined today with Dr. Bryn Burkholder, an assistant professor of ophthalmology at the Johns Hopkins Wilmer Eye Institute. Dr. Burkholder specializes in ocular inflammatory infectious diseases, cataract surgery, and comprehensive ophthalmology, and is a contributing author to the newly released book, Women in Ophthalmology, a comprehensive guide for career and life. So welcome, Dr. Burkholder.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you. I just wanted to start out with talking about a little bit about you and your journey and, what brought you to medicine and ultimately ophthalmology.
Sure. So for as long as I can remember as a child, I actually didn't want to be a human doctor. I wanted to be a veterinarian, and I thought for sure that was what I was going to do. I was pre-vet at the beginning of college, and then the summer after my sophomore year of college, I did a pre-vet summer course at Tufts University, and just realized that it wasn't actually a great fit for me. And so I was very grateful that I had that experience, and I came to that realization. So after that, the natural second choice was medicine. And part of the reason for that was that I love science. And the other big part of it is that both my parents are physicians. I know that's a fairly common thing among upcoming physicians as well, that they've been exposed to it in their childhood. So after I decided that the vet thing wasn't for me, I decided to turn to human medicine. And that actually turned out to be a great fit. And I don't have any regrets about that at all.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, how I got into ophthalmology. So this is not an uncommon theme that you'll hear. My father was an ophthalmologist. He's now a retired general ophthalmologist. So I was exposed to it throughout childhood and growing up, and always really liked the field, found it to be interesting. But when I went into medical school, I felt very strongly that I wanted to consider all specialties, and I didn't want to get pigeonholed into ophthalmology. So I tried very hard actually not to go into ophthalmology, but with every rotation, it would be the eye things that kind of got my interest. So like a case of diplopia in the ED, or a case of herpes zoster with eye involvement on the medicine wards. I just found that I kept being drawn back to ophthalmology. I did a few electives and finally just conceded that, hey, this is a really cool field. My dad picked correctly. This would be a great fit for me too. And so went into ophthalmology.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's a pretty common story that I've heard so far, that, ophthalmologists have parents who are in the field and they really don't want to go through the same path, but it's a great field. So that's what ends up happening.
Yeah, I agree. It is a great field.
Mm-hmm. So how did you get connected with Dr. Burkholder and Dr. Wang?
So Dr. Wang and I did residency together at Wilmer. She was the year behind me. So we became really good friends as residents and have stayed in touch.
Oh, that's awesome. So she just reached out to you, I guess, when she was writing the book and getting authors together?
She did, yes. And she asked me specifically if I wanted to do the chapter that I did. So she kind of assigned my topic.
Got it. Yeah, you have the first chapter here talking about the match in residency, which is, a topic that I'm really interested in as a third year medical student, trying to navigate everything. Why exactly did you want to get involved in a project like this, especially since it's written for women?
Well, I thought it was great that it was specifically for women. You don't see that a lot. So I thought it was kind of a novel thing. And I've been involved in mentoring throughout my career so far, and it seemed like an interesting opportunity. And so I was happy to do it.
Yeah, I think that's really awesome because, a lot of the advice obviously is applicable to men and women, especially when you're talking about something like match and the process of it. But I think through the lens of, as a woman, different considerations you make as you go throughout your career, I think this book is a really, valuable piece of information and resource moving forward throughout your career. So I think that's really awesome that you were able to be involved with it.
Yeah, I was glad to do it. And you're right, my chapter was fairly fairly widely applicable to men and women, but there are chapters in that book that are more specific, especially when talking about career and family and having kids. So it's not just a book for women, but there are definitely parts of it that are specific.
Yeah, for sure. So kind of getting into the meat of your chapter, which is about match and residency. You said that this topic was kind of assigned to you, but how did you go about, researching or kind of figuring out what you wanted to say?
I think it was a good assignment for me, and I think this is probably why Christina gave it to me. I'm on the residency selection committee at Wilmer now, and have been for several years. And I also am involved in the residency program and teaching. So it kind of fit my area of expertise, and so I've definitely been involved in selecting our residents over the past decade or so.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of research, I drew on my own experiences. I drew on the experiences that of the applicants that have come over the years and my fellow committee members, and then also did some looking into the literature about things like match rates and number of applications per applicant, and what are sort of the factors that influence whether a person is matched or not. So did a little bit of looking around on PubMed and reading there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the points that you made that I found really interesting was about research. I feel like the message is so mixed about research and how much someone should do, and how important it is to take an extra year or something like that. And I was wondering what you thought about that, because your message was kind of that research is important, but not necessarily essential.
Yeah, so it's not required. I think that if you are interested in matching at an academic center, then it's really, really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
A few points to consider. If you're interested in research, I think it's helpful to have a project that is really your own and that you dedicate yourself to, instead of having a bunch of smaller projects that you might be peripherally involved in, and then you have your name on the paper somewhere in the middle of a mix of authors. It's much better if you can demonstrate ownership of a project, show that you saw it through to the end, and that you're able to publish and be first or last author on the paper. And that gives you something to talk about in interviews, because you will be asked about it and what your role was. And if you can say you were there from the beginning and you saw it through to the end, that really carries much more weight than a project where you were just kind of involved in a few things, but you didn't really have ownership of it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's an important point. The other thing is that I don't think it is as essential that it is ophthalmology research. It helps, especially because you're going to meet people in the field and you're going to have things to talk about. But if you find that you start out in med school with a project in ENT or neuro or something like that, that you're really passionate about and you follow through with it and you have it published, that's great. And again, that carries more weight, at least with our committee, than with someone who has a couple smaller projects that they're peripherally involved in. So it doesn't have to be ophtho. Sometimes it's helpful, but the key is you want to have a project that you are really involved in, that you can talk about on your interview day.
Right. I think that's so important to, be passionate about what you're working in and be able to have a conversation about it. I was wondering, especially since you serve on the application committee or the admissions committee, what you think the impact of COVID has been on research. I know it impacted my ability to be involved in in-person research, and how you're seeing that reflected on applications.
So I haven't seen this year's batch of applications, but last year was the first year that COVID was a factor, obviously. So I do think that people had more time for certain types of research, like bench research. A lot of cases they weren't able to do because labs were shut down. But something like a chart review is something that they could do easily when they were home and not able to go to clinics. So saw a bit of that. But also there wasn't a whole lot of turnaround time between March when COVID hit, and then I'm guessing people were submitting their applications right around this time last year. I think it'll probably be more of a factor this year, but like I said, I haven't seen applications yet. That should be within the next few weeks.
Mm-hmm. Another change that you touched on in your chapter was STEP and board scores. And that's one thing that is changing as well. I think one of the numbers that you cited was like a 243 and above. It's kind of a guiding number for the number of schools that or programs that you would apply to for residency based on the literature. But how do you think that'll change given the new pass-fail, and I guess the coming applicants will kind of have a mix of some having scores, some not?
Yeah, so that is something that has changed since I wrote that chapter in the fall of 2019. Coming up, I don't know if it's this year or the following year, step one is going to be pass-fail. Mm-hmm. So that is a big change. I know some programs used a cutoff, like an absolute cutoff for step one score above which they would interview and below which they wouldn't. Mm-hmm. So for people who aren't great standardized test takers, this is probably a good thing because they're not going to have that hurdle to clear to potentially get their foot in the door. For other people, for people who are good at standardized testing, it's probably a negative in that, we do look at the score. I don't think we have great data on how step one scores correlate with performance in residency yet. So it's always a topic of conversation among our selection committee members about how much weight we should be putting on it. So I think it kind of remains to be seen, but it was a piece of data that we had at least to consider in choosing our applicants, and now it's not a factor.
Right. I think it'll be interesting to see how it impacts things going forward, especially since the other things that you would use as metrics, like grades, a lot of them have become pass-fail too, especially due to COVID. So I think that's interesting.
That's another good point. And so a lot of programs have gone to pass-fail. So we're really losing a lot of objective measures, and maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's not. But those were hard numbers we could at least use to compare, and we don't have those anymore.
Right. And with so much uncertainty, I think this is really where mentorship plays a huge role in kind of finding someone who can help you navigate all of this uncertainty and all of these changes. And I know that's something you talked about as well. Do you mind touching a little bit on what you find as the role of mentorship in an application process?
Sure. I think that having a mentor to help you through the process is one of the best things you can do for yourself. My mentor, for example, was really instrumental in talking to me about whether or not I was a strong applicant. So that can help you kind of determine how many programs you should be applying to. Talked to me about the strengths and weaknesses of the programs I was interested in, looked at my potential list of places where I wanted to apply, made suggestions and edits to that. Then after my interviews, talked to me about what I liked and didn't like about programs and kind of helped me guide my rank list. A mentor can help in terms of writing a letter of recommendation, because that's a person who in theory should know you well, better than most people who will be writing letters of recommendation. And so as someone who reads applications, I can tell pretty quickly what letters are coming from someone who knows the person versus just kind of has worked with them a few times. And it's always so much better reading a letter where I know that they know the person and have a really good sense of who they are. And so I give those letters a little more weight. Mm-hmm. So I think it is important to have someone who knows you and can write a letter about you. And then mentors can be still important even post-match. Just throughout your career, ophthalmology as a field is relatively small. And so you'll be seeing that person over the years at meetings, and it's nice to kind of touch base and check in with them. And I think they can be helpful for years to come.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And it also sounds like there are different types of mentors. I think, there are mentors that can help you through every step of the process. And I think those are really valuable, but I think it's just as valuable to have those people that, maybe are in the specific subspecialty that you're interested in. And maybe they're not the person to help you through the entire process, but if you have questions about lifestyle or, other things down the road, that's important as well.
Right. Or maybe you'd have a research mentor or someone that you come to for more of kind of the application process part of it. So yes, I definitely agree that there are different kinds of mentors.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any advice on finding a mentor? I know everyone is busy, so it's kind of sometimes hard to gauge on, expecting someone to invest in you and, putting in that time. But do you have any advice?
I think you really have to get out there. For folks who are fortunate enough to have an ophthalmology program within their medical school, this means doing electives. Maybe if you can go to grand rounds, a little trickier now that a lot of them are in person, but going to grand rounds is a good way to show your interest and potentially meet people. Getting involved in a research project. It's all kind of about meeting a number of different people, which is so much, I think, a better way to pick a mentor than just like cold calling or cold emailing a stranger and saying, hey, I'd like to work with you. Your med school advisor may have suggestions of people who have worked with med students before in the past. You might meet someone that way. And then if you don't have an ophthalmology program at your med school, I think it really is important to do an away elective first to make sure that you really like ophthalmology and that's a good choice for you. And then also to start meeting people and potential mentors that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really great advice. And especially what you were saying about away rotations. I think that's another topic that can be a source of confusion for students on whether they should do it or not, whether it would help them or hurt them. And I think the advice that you wrote in your book, in your chapter of the book, was really great. And I was wondering if you could maybe expand on it a little bit and what considerations students should make. And would you ever recommend doing more than one away rotation if time permits?
Sure. I think that, especially if you don't have an ophthalmology program at your med school, they're essential, and more than one would be a good idea, I think. The advice given to me coming from a program that did have ophthalmology was that unless I really had questions about a particular program or was really very interested in a program away, that I probably didn't need to do away rotations. But I was coming from a place that did have a strong ophtho department and people there, connections there. So I think that especially if you have your heart set on a particular program, I think it would serve you well to do an away rotation there if you can.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think due to COVID, there were some restrictions on how many you can do, but hopefully that'll open up a little bit more as things get better, hopefully.
Yes, hopefully soon.
Hopefully soon, yeah. So in thinking about preparing to be a good applicant and then later a great resident, we're thinking about kind of things you can do in preclinical versus clinical years. And I kind of wanted to maybe jump back a bit to preclinical years. And it seems to me like the most important thing is exposure and kind of figuring out what you like and keeping an open mind going into your rotations. It's also a time where you can do research because maybe you have time during the summer between first and second year. But I guess when you're giving advice, how do you approach advising preclinical students versus clinical students?
For the preclinical years, I think it's all about, like you said, getting exposure and trying to figure out what you like. So there's no real reason to rush into one specialty early, I don't think, because this is what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. If it takes an extra year of med school to figure it out, then I think that's worth it for something this big of a commitment. So in the preclinical years, I would encourage you to do things like join an ophtho interest group or whatever. If you have a few different things that you think you might potentially be interested in, why not join all of those interest groups? Participate in some activities. Many med schools have a glaucoma screening program, a community glaucoma screening program. Some of them are called Sight Savers. That's a great way to get some exposure to the field, maybe meet some faculty members, work with patients, learn the exam. That'll give you a sense of, okay, I could do this. This is interesting. I like looking at the optic nerve. I like thinking about these things that are related to ophthalmology. So that's a great way to do it. Some specialties in my med school had like a monthly or bi-monthly happy hour where the faculty would come out and talk to you about your career interests. So I think just you have a lot of time in med school. It's busy, but there's enough time that you can just experience a little bit of the few specialties you might be interested in. So that's what I would tell preclinical students.
Mm-hmm. And then with clinical students, I think it's more of the experiences and kind of what we have talked about already, sounds like.
So getting into the different rotations, thinking about research projects, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. I had one question in particular, looking ahead at my own application process, when it comes to writing a personal statement, and maybe any advice that you have on, kind of forming that and at a point where I'm kind of a year out from starting my application, and things to think about, things to reflect on before I start that process.
Personal statements are tough. There are so many that sound very, very much the same, and that's okay. I don't think that there are many applications that are make or break on just on a personal statement, unless you say something really outrageous.
Mm-hmm.
The purpose of a personal statement is to introduce yourself to the committee, explain why you're interested in ophthalmology, maybe talk about some of your future goals as an ophthalmologist, what's been impactful to you so far, the things you've done. Like I said, it's rarely make or break. So make sure you have someone that you trust, read it over, edit it a little bit, take a step back from it for a little while, come back to it, read it again, edit it, and then submit it. But personal statements, I don't think are critical, I would say.
Okay, so maybe in the way that they kind of played a bigger role perhaps in medical school applications, perhaps not as much when it comes to residency applications.
I have to say that I wasn't involved in med school admissions, so I don't know, but I see so many personal statements that all sound the same, and it's okay. It's talking about how people first got interested in ophthalmology. Sometimes it's an international experience or experience with a parent. And they're great stories and nice to read, but there's rarely something that says, oh, this person needs to come here.
So what do you think it is, or what number of things makes applicants stand out to you?
Many times, the letter of recommendation is important, especially if I can tell that the person writing it knows the applicant. They'll say some things that are just unique to the person, about the person. And that's helpful, especially if I know the letter writer and trust the letter writer. So I'm coming from the bias of I'm at an academic institution. So if their research is really outstanding, or if they can, during their interview, talk about their research and demonstrate that they've really done a good job or are passionate about it, that's helpful. Mm-hmm. Enthusiasm for ophthalmology is a big thing. Like if you can tell the person's really excited about it, that's the kind of person that I want at our program. I want to teach. It's a competitive field, so almost everyone has great grades, great step scores, although that's going away. But it's things like letters of recommendation and research that make people stand out.
Got it. Thank you. That's helpful. And then I was kind of thinking about away rotations, and during medical school, you don't necessarily get much exposure to ophthalmology besides a few things in our courses versus if you do an elective yourself and have experience on your own. But how do you recommend that students prepare for their away rotations, especially if it's a program that they're really interested in?
I would make sure that you've done some reading about the topics. So if you are doing a neuro-ophthalmology rotation, for example, I would find a copy of the Basic Science and Clinical course series for residents, and I would read that book, or just a basic neuro-ophthalmology textbook. I would get familiar with it so that you have some basic knowledge going in. I would make sure you know a little bit about the program and the faculty there as well. And then when you go, I would be yourself. I mean, the purpose of this is trying to find out if you're a good match for the program, and vice versa. So it's in your best interest to present your authentic self when you go. And of course you want to put your best foot forward, but you want to be yourself so the program can see who you are, and you can evaluate them.
Mm-hmm. I think that's so important. I think a lot of the time the emphasis is on, showing your best self and putting your best self forward, but it's also important to remember that as applicants, we're also evaluating the programs as well and figuring out where we would be happy for the next several years. So I think that's so important.
Right. And if you know that you're passionate about patient care and you want to be an excellent clinician, it doesn't really serve you to put the face forward that you want to go into research and that to be your main focus. So, present what you want to do, because this is, you want to get to a place that's going to help you become the ophthalmologist that you want to be.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great message. And then kind of jumping a little ahead to residency. So that's the other half of your chapter, and not somewhere that I am currently on in my journey yet, but I was wondering what you would say about preparing for the learning curve of residency, similarly to, away rotations. It's, a whole different ball game. So what advice would you give to incoming residents and interns?
I was given the advice that when we all started out, there would be some of us that had done ophthalmology rotations before and were, could use a 90 diopter lens and could see the fundus and applanate a patient and had these basic clinical skills. And for the first few days to a week, they would have kind of the edge and they would be ahead of everyone else. But by a week or two in, everyone's on the same plane. Everyone catches up. And so the advice to me was, you don't need to go crazy with ophthalmology electives prior to going into ophthalmology. You're going to get to the same level as everyone else very quickly. Mm-hmm. And so along those lines, I tell folks in internship, if they have electives, don't necessarily feel like you have to do ophthalmology electives. Sure, maybe do one or two, but if you have a chance to do something different and it interests you, why not do that? Because this is the only chance you're going to have. Once you're in ophthalmology residency, you can't do a month of infectious disease. So when I was an intern, I did an infectious disease rotation. I did a neurology rotation. Just tried to get a flavor for other things that were interesting to me. And I'm glad I did. And it turned out to be right that even though some of us were a little bit more ahead on ophthalmology things the first week of residency, it evens out very quickly.
Yeah. And I think that echoes the advice that you gave for medical students as well, is to not necessarily feel like you have to do all of the ophthalmology electives, do other things as well, because that's the only time really, if you do go into ophthalmology, that you're going to be able to see other things. So yeah.
Right. And the eye is not the only thing. You're still a doctor taking care of the whole patient. So I think being well-rounded is to your advantage.
Mm-hmm. When I was on my medicine rotation, they knew that I was interested in ophthalmology, and I would get so excited about all of the, eye cases that we have, but they kind of went out of their way to give me other stuff and just let me peripherally, listen in on the eye cases, because that's hopefully what I'll be doing for many years to come. So it's good to get other experiences as well.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that I really loved that you touched on and emphasized was finding balance during residency. I know it's a time where you have the opportunity to soak in as much as you can, and you have so many resources available to you, but at the same time, you don't want to burn out. And I think that was a great message. And I was wondering maybe what tactics or, strategies you found useful in finding balance in a time where time really is so limited and you feel like it could be better filled in training and things like that.
Right. As a resident, you're working really hard. No matter what program you go to, you're going to work hard. And although it's important to immerse yourself in that experience and to learn as much as you can, if you're only doing ophthalmology, that's really a recipe for burnout. And so in terms of personal strategies, so I found that I functioned better, thought clearer if I got outside and physical, like that was really important for me to maintain balance. Sometimes it meant that I was getting off of a 12-hour ED shift and driving straight to where I run and going for a run at 7 at night. But that was better for me mentally than just skipping it and going home and sitting on the couch. That's not for everybody, but I would prioritize that, and I knew to prepare for it. So I would bring running clothes with me to my shift and just have what I needed so that I could make it happen. And so I think you really have to kind of make a concerted effort to have your own time to do things outside of ophthalmology, even if that requires a little bit of preparation to make it happen. I think it's important.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's so important, especially in medical school, to start figuring out what those things are when we have these time constraints. It just kind of gets harder in residency to then figure out what you like to do. So yeah, to anyone listening, I think that's amazing advice and something I'm still trying to figure out. And so thank you so much. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. And so I was wondering if you have any parting advice as we wrap up to medical students and residents navigating this process and going through this journey that you are on.
I thought later after I answered the question about letters of recommendation, I don't mean to harp on the research component of things because we've had many outstanding applicants who have done things other than research that have made them stand out. So for example, we've had people who have invented things and had patents and or have done global health type things. And that's really impressive. And it's cool to see someone passionate about that. So the not letter of recommendation, the personal statement is a great place to talk about some of your passions outside of ophthalmology. So that might be a great use of your personal statement and helps us get to know you a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
And along those lines, you should know that having something like that that's not traditional, not necessarily research focused, can still be really helpful to your application. And so that can make a strong, well-rounded applicant as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much for all of your pearls and words of wisdom. And I hope anyone listening will go and read her chapter and just, get more out of this wonderful book and this journey. And I really appreciate that you took time out of your day today to talk to us. And thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks for having me, and good luck to all of the applicants this year and in the future.
Thank you.